I think I drew the short straw coming in after all those great presentations. I'm probably going to cover a bit of what was said earlier. I think the way I've tried to approach it is to come from our experience, so you're probably going to see a lot of stuff we've done, are doing, and what's coming. I suppose there's lots, I think everywhere you turn now at the moment, you're seeing MMC or volumetric, there's lots of talk about it, and what modern methods is. I was sitting there earlier looking at this lovely wall, wondering 400 years ago was someone standing here installing the great modern methods of building stone walls. I suppose everything keeps moving, and every day there's a new modern method coming on the horizon. So what we're trying to do at the moment is just try to keep up with that and all of the new stuff that's coming. So I suppose just quickly I'm just going to introduce our experience. It'll be kind of covering some of the stuff Arthur introduced you to earlier, but in a little bit more detail. Why are we here? Just quickly, then what are modern methods of construction? I suppose our view, and most of that is going to be based around what we're kind of doing and looking at what we've done. What is all the hype about? So I'll touch on a few of the good points, I suppose, hopefully, maybe some of the bad ones, and then what we're looking at over the next year from our perspective. I suppose on our experience, as Arthur was saying earlier, so it started in 2014 really, but kind of look back, we were probably doing bits and pieces. So this was a scheme for it's the inland port for the Dublin Port Authority. So it was just seven units to form an office for them. So it was converted containers, and obviously using a container then to create an entrance feature for them. They really bought into it, obviously, because it's what they do. They move containers around the place. So the idea of having something made from stuff they were going to get rid of kind of really hit home for them. Then looking at the next big one for us was Schema and Sandiford. So it was 818 beds plus common rooms for a student scheme. So it was pretty big, and it was for a Swedish client called Prime Living, and they'd done modular schemes around Europe, so that their thing was student housing. And they came in and they bought this site in Sandiford and came in all gung-ho going, we're going to build this and we're going to do it very quickly. But I suppose the sore lessons of trying to deal with Irish authorities kind of hit home very quickly for them. And so this was a fully containerized scheme as well. So like each one of those fits in a container. It was to be manufactured in China. They had a factory over there. Trying to deal with that was interesting in its own right as well. And so put on a container, shipped here, and just lifted into position. You can see the gaps kind of sitting between where the cores would have been. So the cores were traditional, so it was brought up to, due to be brought up to first floor and transfer slab, and then the cores come up in concrete to stabilise the building. So there are just a few graphics. So like we went through a whole process of fully designing this with, I suppose, Ethos Engineering did a lot of work with us, because M&E becomes critical when you're trying to fit something into 2.9 meters, I think containers, or 2.8. So it becomes very difficult, because you've a lot. You can deal with the bedrooms themselves, don't have a massive amount coming in, but when you come into the corridor and start to get your weight back down into the common rooms, it gets very congested very quickly, and trying to squeeze that and get it to fit in took a good bit of work. But I suppose without modelling it, we wouldn't have been able to achieve that. Like, it was working with the two and getting it fully coordinated. Now, it obviously hasn't been tested on site yet, so we're kind of optimistic that it's workable, I suppose. Then next one we kind of moved on to is it's a scheme in Cookstown. So it's part of the whole Cookstown regeneration. So this is a Modular Homes Ireland scheme, fully volumetric, and hopefully due to go on site in the very near future. So we're working on that at the moment, and working with MHI to try to get that organised. It's kind of their first one of a big scale, so there's a lot of teasing out and trying to figure out how it's going to all work when it comes. I suppose, as Declan showed earlier, it's nothing new. It's probably new to us here, but it's not that it hasn't been done before. So there's lots of lessons learned and stuff we can feed in on. And so that's led on to other schemes, a couple in Cookstown and another couple out around, where we're looking at, we've kind of moved into a scenario now where we're getting a lot of clients to buy into what we're saying, which is very good. So all our resi schemes, bar one at the moment, are designed as modular. So we start thinking about it from day one. That first one in Cookstown was designed traditionally and was reversed post-planning into modular. I'm not saying that it can't be done, but it gets difficult because you're trying to make it fit into a box that you probably wouldn't have tried to fit it into in the first place. We managed to do it and retain the same quantity of units, which delighted the client. But yeah, it just adds a bit of extra time and some extra cost, obviously, because you're having to get in there and rework it. I suppose part of the journey, we've been out and about. We've kind of been progressively going out to see what's happening outside of Ireland, because most of what we're doing now is finding out what's going on there and bringing it in. I suppose there's a lot of new products and stuff coming to market, but typically what we're seeing is that they're based on products that are and have been thought about somewhere else. So I suppose the most interesting one was for the Sandiford project, actually going to China to see a factory over there and trying to teach them what quality is, I suppose, was an issue. I suppose it hasn't been tested yet, so the big one there is just to make sure, like we actually hired a French company that are based in China, and they'll do quality checks before it gets on a ship, because obviously once it's on a ship for 8 weeks, and if it comes wrong, there's not a whole lot you can do about it when it's here. So as part of that process, obviously not as involved in it as Declan, but it was our kind of first real experience with fire testing. So they actually built a sample of the container module and burned it in Belfast. I suppose just to reinforce Declan's point, that I suppose when it comes to, I suppose in particular the fire authorities, bringing them on the journey, which is critical. Like, so we had very early engagement there. So like as soon as we had hit planning, we were starting to talk to the fire guys, and we actually brought them. We invited, this is Dunleary right down, but we invited them and the other local authorities to come up to the testing just to see it, because I think it's about bringing them through the process just to reinforce, because it's like a lot of stuff, I suppose, like when timber frame first came in, there was a lot of nervousness about it, and that's there now at the moment with I suppose volumetric in particular, and dealing with that. But again, it's nothing new, it's been done, and it's been done in other places, so we just, I suppose, need to bring that on. So why are we here? I suppose I'm hoping most people are here to try and come out of the mediocre to kind of advance themselves and to learn. I suppose that's what drives us, is to try be a little bit different, I suppose, in the way we think about things, and bring it on. I suppose it's great that CitA are doing this whole series around modern methods, but I suppose for years they've been driving digitisation, and that's where we've kind of been coming from as well. Like, and I think it's kind of lent well to us in that we've been able to bring that kind of different way of thinking. I suppose we adapted quickly to change and bringing in digital ways of doing stuff, so it kind of helped us. So hopefully get through this quick enough. So I suppose there's just a bit about my interpretation of what the different systems are out there. So I suppose, as the guys were saying earlier, you've got your basic, it's 2D and 3D, so like you're either building it out of 2D components or fully volumetric, your pods and your actual modules. But I suppose in our experience, it's either one of the last two. Like it's typically a hybrid of both. So you're doing volumetric with panelised facades, or you're doing pods with in situ concrete. So that's I suppose our experience of it. And then looking at some of the other things that are big, there's a lot of big construction companies driving into it. I don't know if you're all familiar with the principle of the Mace vertical factory. So they basically build a factory on the site, and the factory comes up with the building. So they do floor by floor, and they're kind of doing structure and then finishing out 3 floors below it, something around that. So as they come up, once the factory has gone up, the floor is typically finished, or they're just doing finishes inside. Obviously, only really lends itself to high rise. Not sure it'd be feasible to be doing it for a 3-story house, but it's very interesting that and I suppose Langer Root in the UK have been driving. They were very very early driving into this concept of factory built components. So they've kind of done a lot, I suppose, for this over the years. So just looking, I suppose, at again back to our experience, but so 2D and 3D. Like if we concentrate on the 2D first. So this is a scheme. Actually, Herb will be familiar with it, but trying to get it across the line at the moment. But when you look at it, it's a very tight site in Stony Batter. It's 142 student beds. There's not a whole lot you can do with it. You actually have to take out a house to be able to build a scheme in there. So like this is, I suppose the solution that was settled on here is fully precast. So external walls, internal walls, floors, precast brought in, lifted into place, and pods, and then everything is kind of traditional on that. But the idea is to get the heavy bit out of the way, so to get the frame up as quickly as possible, and then everything else should be in quick enough, hopefully. Again, that's trying to get over the line, but it was due to start in February, and they were looking at being fully complete July next year. So like it's a pretty tight program in a very tight site. This is one we're doing out. It's a hotel out at the airport, so it's out in Clonshock. It's just next to the Beauties, I think, next door. I can never remember. But in terms of this, so what we're looking at here is a precast panelised structure on it. We have pods in there as well, like so. They're all lifted into place as it goes, and then we've got a panelised facade, a unitised facade, for want of a better word. So like everything kind of happens very quickly here. So turn down a bit. So I'll keep talking. So what you're seeing, I just said I'd show this because it kind of shows how it can speed up very quickly. So like getting up to first floor took a bit of time, because always getting out of the ground does that. But once they start laying slabs and bringing in the precast, it starts to move very quickly. Now all of this, so like your precast, your pods, I suppose by the time we were laying foundations, they were all already making facade panels. Like the pods were already made and sitting on the ground ready to come up.
Does that have a camera?
Mm-hmm.
Does that have a camera?
I don't know who it is. I think it probably is, yeah. It's not a whole lot. So you'll start to see the facade come along here. Now it's not without its issues. You're trying to deal with it, so you'll see the facade being stripped a bit. Like we had our fire issues on it. Like so, getting it right is critical. I suppose, as mentioned before, Grenfell has kind of changed the way the industry looks at all of this, and even at the moment, I suppose what's happening in the inquiry at the moment is they're I suppose as consultants they're looking at the consulting piece of it very, very much at the moment. So there's a lot going to come out of that, I think. So like that's a 10-story building where the structure went up in less than 4 months. Like so, it's very quick. They've just kind of closed it out now at the moment, and they're into finishing it. I kind of say it to them a lot when I'm out there, but the thing that gets me at the moment is that you can open a door and walk into a fully finished pod, and you're kind of standing there thinking that, why wasn't the bedroom done that way? Because there's lots of, I suppose one of the issues we have at the moment is waiting for the concrete to dry out to be able to put wallpaper on it, so you can finish it. So like those things kind of, while you pick up speed, you kind of lose it in other places. So like the volumetric for the likes of hotels and student housing is, I think it's going to be a big game changer in terms of speed and whatnot. So 3D then, so we kind of spent a lot of time going back to basics. So we went back to, because a lot of this, I suppose a lot of stuff we're looking at the moment are apartments. So going back to what makes up an apartment and the construction of that and breaking it back to modules. And then as architects trying to be conscious that there's an external design here. I suppose as the guys were saying earlier, the big players in this, the likes of Greystar and these guys, it is all about experience. Like it's about what their sell is a user experience to clients. So typically, I suppose the facade, while they have a concern about how the building looks, typically it's all about the inside. So for us, trying to keep control of that and trying to hopefully make the buildings look well as be good buildings, I suppose, is it's difficult because at the end of the day, the design of the facade or the building itself is a small component in the whole overall part of it, but very important. So I suppose going through processes then, like on the Sandiford project, so like we were early days into like modular layouts and trying to figure that out and trying to get that to work. Like when we were in planning, we were doing details, so we're trying to figure out the makeup of the walls, how you achieve the fire rating, how you get the floors to work, how you get your, I suppose mainly fire, and then getting all the components, and then like I suppose the beauty of it is you're dealing with component parts, so you might have typically 3 to 4, maybe 5 of a standard type that might have many variants, but once you get 1 or 2 of these things sorted, it very quickly develops. Then in Cookstown, then again, so we did this. I suppose just trying to get this to work. The interesting one here was that this building is actually under the flight path for Baldonnel. So we ended up with the first oral hearing in an SHD process purely because we had the Department of Defence were insisting on meeting us to talk about it. But one of the critical things to them wasn't so much the building, but it was the cranes when the building was being built. And because we were building it in modular, we were able to sit down with them and go, look, if it was traditional, you'd have cranes up there for 12 to 14 months trying to get it finished. But we're able to condense that now into a 4 to 6 week period. So once the cranes go up, they're just there for the 4 to 6 weeks to lift in the modules, and then everything else is kind of got from cherry pickers and the like. So like they really bought into that, and they're going. So instead of us having to worry about planes coming in for 14 months, they're okay to do it over 4 weeks, and it becomes opened up the conversation and made it very easy. So again, so just put that up there quickly. So you're kind of seeing on the left was kind of the old traditional one, and then just breaking it down. So what you end up doing, I suppose, in a traditional scheme, you kind of move your storage and stuff out. Everything's about getting areas down. Whereas in the funny conversation with developers now is that we're putting in more area into your thing because we have to keep walls lining up internally. So, yeah, but they seem to have bought into it, which is good. I think they see the benefits in terms of speed and handover. This was an interesting one with Sky Maxstone. We actually ended up losing the tender, but we did a lot of work. This is the DCC rapid build that they wanted done, tendered in 3 months, but a year and a half later they're just getting on site. But there was we did a lot of work on this, and this one in terms of facade, because there were traditional brick, and when you start loading brick onto these buildings, it gets very heavy. So even how you approach that and deal with that, and I suppose that there's also increased cavity widths because you're into scenarios where you're using rock wool, which means more. So there was a lot of work and experience in trying to get that solved and deal with it. and then to keep the modular thing going. So what is all the hype about then? So I'm going to try cover it under these four areas. Everyone typically talks about costs. I suppose Arthur mentioned the McKinley report that came out. So like they obviously see savings in it. Typically what we're experiencing or finding is that if you tendered traditional versus modular or a modern method, typically they won't. The modular's coming in a bit more expensive, but if you compare your tender price versus your final sign-off price, there seems to be an increase in the traditional method that actually brings it back on par. So you have more cost certainty, I suppose, in modular or modern. I suppose the cost, there's prelim cost savings there in terms of you're not being able to build it in a factory. You're kind of reducing transport costs, and I suppose most of the costs tend to come around health and safety. So like you're actually working at ground level, so you've got workers that are coming into a factory working. I think those are hotel units that we're going to in New York. So some of those at that stage were up from the 35th, 36th floor. So you can imagine like there's guys coming in putting glass in those units that are going to the 36th floor of a building somewhere. So the reduction in risk is there. In terms of time saving, I suppose there's a definite reduction, but I suppose what you're doing is buying time. You're offsetting it. It's not that it's going to take any less time to build it. What you're doing is taking a portion of time and bringing it forward. So when you're in the ground digging foundations, you're actually building rooms and finishing it out, which has its issues. You have to bring decision making back very early, which is difficult to deal with sometimes because they're not expecting to have to make it. So it's a journey to bring them on. So I suppose time, like I suppose the one we're dealing with at the moment again in Cookstown, like we're looking at 6 to 8 months saving on that. So like that's 6 to 8 months rent because it's a PRS scheme. So for a PRS company, obviously they have to get it rented. I suppose being the issue, but it is additional. I'm surprised no one mentioned this earlier. I was reminded of it last night. So our 10-day hospital, 1,000-bed hospital in China. But I suppose the one key thing to remember here is they wouldn't have been able to do that if they hadn't got the components built already somewhere. So like it's not that they started 10 days ago and finished it. They were actually building. So what I suppose it's one of the benefits of being in such a large economy. You can actually ring out and find enough pre-built stuff to be able to do this. And I suppose the other interesting thing is a lot of it is 2D. It's not even volumetric. So it's there's a lot of finishing even in there when it's done. So quality is the other big one for us. I suppose having visited a lot of these schemes, like there's definitely I suppose not that at the end of the day you're hoping to walk into a scheme, a traditional beside a modern method scheme, and not be able to tell the difference. That's the end goal. But there is definitely, I suppose, quality becomes easier. So like the likes of snagging is reduced because it's done in a factory. It's all checked before it comes out. So it just reduces a lot of time in terms of trying to get that. And then obviously I mentioned one of the biggest reductions in risk is the health and safety aspect of being able to construct all of this off-site and come in and lift it in. I suppose from our own perspective, like this is just a quick slide to show, like we're looking at schemes now from the get-go as modular. So we have them, so we're able to very quickly look at number of units and break it down into kind of a sensible logic in terms of volumetric. And then just even coming in on schemes, we've come in on a few schemes to actually look at trying to reduce, not to reduce the quality of the thing, but to a lot of schemes, I suppose, when it comes to modern methods, one-offs tend to increase costs. So the more you can rationalise that, the better it gets. And then what's happening next? So I suppose there's these 6 events happening over the year. So I suppose it'd be good if everyone can come out to them and we can continue the conversation going. One of the things we've done last year, so we were getting quite a lot of queries coming in from clients, and this where Arthur actually had to rush off. It was a big opportunity we couldn't miss. We in October we organised an event and got 100 of the key players into a room, and the point of that was to actually get them in and go, look, what are you looking for here? So there was developers, there was manufacturers, consultants, and out of that came this concept of like the Modular and Offsite Institute. So this idea that we'll get a group or an organisation that can actually feed information out there. So we've recently completed a survey, so we're hoping to kind of launch that in Q2 this year. We're trying to get, I suppose, the industry involved in it. So it's kind of the first large volumetric scheme here to be done, and kind of hopefully will get underway this year. And then for ourselves, like, we're just continuing to R&D into this field, so branching out there into, I suppose, some of the other areas that we're not covering yet. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.